So good evening, everyone. We're here at High Purpose Church. Pastor Lawrence here, dealing with our married couples growth group, and we are continuing on laying our foundation for marriage. We've been talking for the last 5 weeks or so about marriage. We've talked about the 4 laws of marriage. We talked about the foundation of marriage, which is important to understand why we're in this thing known as marriage. We talked about personality differences. And how understanding how God has wired you can help you better understand yourself and interact with your spouse. We talked about relationship dynamics, and we talked about how in every relationship, in every marriage relationship, there needs to be 3 relationships we manage. One is with God, the other is with our spouse, and then thirdly is with ourselves. And then we talked last week about conflict resolution. And so in conflict resolution, we said that confrontation is healthy. We need to get good at it, but as long as we do it in the right way so that we resolve it. We said a good fight is one that you finish, and we finish fights in conflicts by getting the root of it and understanding our spouse. And so we only have 2 weeks left. Don't cry. We'll be back next semester, but today and next week will be our last session for this semester. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back in a month, and we'll talk more about marriage from a new perspective. But as we get going, if you're on live, go ahead and share this broadcast, friends, family, neighbors, and enemies, and tell them we're going to get ready to go for about 30 minutes, and we'll go from there. Am I still online? Can anybody see me? Okay, perfect. Well, good. With that being said, we're going to jump into it, and we're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about money. This is an interesting topic. I've wrestled with dealing with this now or next semester, and decided to deal with it now, in part because this is such a big topic and such a big deal. Many marriages that fail, one of the number 1 reasons is money. Actually, sex, money, and kids are the top 3. So we'll have to talk about sex and kids next semester, so tune in. But right now, we'll deal with one of the first challenges, which is money. And money is a big deal. When it comes to money, we have a real different perspective on money. I have discovered that before pastoring, I was dealing with people with finances. In fact, I had started a little business where I did financial counseling, and come to find out there are so many different views and philosophies on money. It's astounding, and there's no reason, there's no wonder why it's such a stressful issue with many couples. Most families, most people I have discovered live in debt. They live paycheck to paycheck. Some stats say 70% are in debt and live paycheck to paycheck. And most, they said, are within 3 checks of going bankrupt. We know that we have challenges when it comes to bankruptcies. We know that we have challenges with just really having issues that set us back financially. One statistic I read said that 92% of couples fight over money on a regular basis. And one thing I've discovered is when it comes to finances, it can cause stress on a marriage. And so if we don't get our hands around this thing of money, it will get its hands around us, and it will cause undue stress. But here's one thing I've found about money as well. If a couple can get on the same page concerning money, if a couple can get to the point where they enthusiastically agree with how to spend money and how to appropriate their finances, that couple, I have found, is 10 times more likely to get through every other conflict. Because many times the way we manage money demonstrates how we manage life. You see, I can't necessarily tell you what your priorities are just based off of what comes out of your mouth, but if I read your checkbook, I know it's important. And this is a key important thing for us to get around. And I will tell you there's lots of challenges we'll get to as we get into this. So let's jump right into it. We only got about 20 minutes or so. So we'll talk about some highlights around finances. One of the things that we have to understand about finances is the way we think about money has to be addressed before we can address how we spend money. You see, if our mind is messed up, then our actions will follow. And a lot of conflicts happen because we're just not on the same page. Because, if I'm spending money because it's very important for me to look good, and you're spending money because it's very important to be safe, we're going to have problems all the time because we fundamentally have different things, goals that we're focused on. And so it's important for us to realize that we got to be on the same page to reduce some of our conflicts. Now, one of the things that the Bible tells us about money is that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. And it's important for us to understand that, because the scripture doesn't say where your heart is, there your treasure will be. But where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Basically, your heart follows your treasure. And so if we can agree with that, we can get our hearts aligned on the same page. And so one of the first things I want to talk about when it comes to money is we got to understand what our priorities are. We must have consistent priorities. Now, if you go back to the first class when we talked about marriage and the foundation, we talked about a high-level set of priorities in terms of what's important, whether it be friends, family, hobbies, God, the like. But when it comes to finances, this is where that exercise really kicks in. It is important for you to make sure that you have the same priorities. Is it important for your kid to have the latest clothes? Is it important for your child to go to private school? Is it important for you to make sure you keep the newest clothes? Is it important for you to make sure your gym membership is up? What are your priorities? And I think that this question can only be answered in the larger context of what you prioritize in marriage. And so we have to have this discussion to make sure we can get on the same page. So priorities are the first thing I would say, and I would suggest that you not only talk about those priorities, but you lay them out in terms of how you're going to spend your money. And so therefore, for example, what are the first level priorities, second level, third level, and the like? Well, one of the first level priorities I would suggest that you have is God. If God is not your first priority, it really can have a problem and have a conflict. It causes conflict in your marriage. So when it comes to keeping God first, we know we want to honor him with the tithe. The Bible tells us that God, he owns and he has rights and controls and is due the first 10%. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of tithing, teaching about tithing here. If you're interested in that, just email or send in a message. We've got resources on that. But we want to make sure that that first 10% is there. If that's not there, what tends to happen is we're saying, God, you don't really have control over everything that happens here, and it's basically up to us to work it out. And I have discovered that that's a place that I don't want to live with my finances, so I want to honor God first. Another level of priority that we should have is our living expenses. I'm going to say living expenses. And when I say living expenses, I'm talking your mortgage, I'm talking food, I'm talking electric bills, things of that nature. The things that are necessary for you to live. You may put your car payment in there. Now the key is there's a balance too, because the truth is we're going to talk about our budgets in a minute. Some of us, when we actually sit and look at our budgets, our spending that we're spending on our living expenses may be way out of whack. So if you're a single mom with 3 kids, you probably shouldn't be living, have a mortgage payment of $5,000 a month, right? No matter how nice the house is, right? And so we have to think about our spending and make sure it's in alignment with our income. But nonetheless, our living expenses, I would say, should be a second priority. Third, we can look at different wants and non-necessities. I'm just putting big major buckets. And so, we have to really wrestle with that and make sure that those priorities are the same, because there's a good chance that if you're not living on a budget, you never put one together, you may find that you're spending more than you make. And I always tell people when it comes to finances, financial problems are not complicated. They're just hard. It's not complicated to understand that if you're making, $50,000 and you spend 51, right, you've got a problem. That's not very complicated. What's hard is cutting out that 1,000, and what do you not spend money on? Now, the truth is, you may want to really work together and take your time with this and building this together, because this is where knives can come out and can be thrown at each other, because when you start talking about cutting costs, that's where things can be a challenge. And so it's important to make sure we start with the priorities and then go from there. Once you have your priorities in place, the next thing that you want to do is build your budget. And very simply, your budget, putting it together at a high level is not a very, again, complex problem. It's not a complex issue. It's something that we need to do, but sometimes can be a little bit hard. Start with your income. Now, let me say this, as a married couple, this is one of the major advantages you have over singles. A lot of times, married people want to be single, and it's funny, single people want to be married. But this is one time where married people is to your advantage because you have two incomes. Now, that two incomes hopefully shouldn't be used for you to get the nicest car you can, get together. But if you put your finances together in the right way, what you're able to do is hopefully live on one income. Let me say that again. You should be able to live on one income. Now, I know that may sound like I just landed on another planet, but bear with me for a second. What we cannot do in our finances is spend everything we make. That's not going to work, because what tends to happen is things happen, right? Car breaks down, you got to replace your tires, you got to replace a water heater, and as soon as something happens, right, we're in debt. The more we're in debt, the more stress we have on our marriage. I don't have time to give examples of how this impacts you, but recognize this: every time you go in debt, you have interest, and compound interest takes that debt and stretches it out much longer than you might expect. In fact, in a class I go through and we talk about this, we have different examples of how debt can impact you, and I'll give you just one as an example here. For example, let's just say you have some debt that you think is relatively minor. I'm trying to find a specific example here of debt, some minor debt. Let's just say, for instance, okay, you have a credit card balance of $7,500. You've bought some stereo equipment, you bought some furniture, whatever. It really doesn't matter what it is, but you have a credit card balance of $7,500. And let's just say you have an interest rate, an annual APR interest rate of 18%. With a 2% minimum repayment made each month, which is about $150, how much money do you think goes towards interest if you pay $150 a month? The answer is only $37.50. Out of the $150, you're paying $37.50 towards principal. The rest of that money is going towards interest. You'll pay over $1,200 in interest in that first year. Here's another example. If you have to pay off a $3,000 credit card at 19.8% interest and you just make the minimum payments, it will take you 39 years to pay that card off. Think about that. $3,000, making the minimum, 39 years. This can become stressful in a marriage. And if you add a credit card here, a car payment here, a mortgage there, before you know it, you cannot afford to get sick. You cannot afford to get angry on your job. You have to be smiling every day. Why? Because you need that job and the overtime and the second job. And here's the problem that I've discovered. When you work two jobs, right, you don't have enough rest. You're not going to talk that nice to your spouse, and then you have other problems that come just because you're tired and you're frustrated. So what you don't want to do in your finances is get overloaded. So therefore, you have to spend less than what you make. Again, married couples, you have an advantage, especially if you can get to the point where you can live on one income. And here's the power of that. If you can get to the point where you live on one income, and a second income is used to do whatever you want, you're always in wealth creation mode. You have a positive cash flow. You now have options. You can do saving. You can invest. You can take vacations. You can do some things that you maybe couldn't do if you were managing your life all the way to the hilt. And this is a really, really powerful concept that's going to take some time to wrestle with to get this down. How do you get to that point? Starts with a budget. That's right, I said a budget. It's not a bad word. It's a budget. It's something that actually frees you up and creates control over your finances. So your budget would start like this. You take your income of you and your spouse. I'd take all of the income, and I'd base your budget only on your regular income. What I mean by that is if you get overtime, don't count that as part of your budget. That's going to be excess. If you've got some bonuses that come in, don't count that as part of your budget. That's excess. Count your normal, steady, regular income. You may want to start with both incomes initially, just to at least lay out the picture to see where you are. You want to then start listing your expenses in priority order. Keep God first. Living expenses, wants and necessities, wants and what I call non-necessities. Hopefully you're not, spending money on vacations and you haven't paid your light bill, because when you come back, the lights will be off. That will cause stress in your marriage. Hopefully our priorities aren't out of whack where we're necessarily going shopping, but we haven't paid our mortgage, right? So make sure the priorities are in place. Once you lay it out, lay everything out in terms of what's going in and what's coming out. See what's at the bottom. That's considered your cash flow. Hopefully it's positive. If it's not, you got to pray. You need to be here next week. But we got to do something about that. If it is negative, that's when we have to start making some choices, right? We have to find a way to get our expenses underneath our income so we can create positive cash flow. We spent an entire class going through a lot of ways to go through that, which we won't be able to do in the 20 minutes here. But if you're looking at your money in priority order, it should start to become obvious where the excess may be. And this may mean cutting back on some things or making some tough choices in terms of how you spend money. But nonetheless, making those choices will free up a lot of opportunities for you to live happily ever after. Once you set up your budget to where you have a positive cash flow, you want to make sure that you're managing that cash flow appropriately. You want to put that money aside to build an emergency fund. An emergency fund should be 3 to 6 times your monthly expenses. Not your income, but your monthly expenses. Hopefully your expenses are less than your income. And so once you have that money aside, you have a comfortable emergency fund. You will be surprised how much happier you'll be in your marriage with an emergency fund on the side. You'll be shocked how much more peace is in your home when you have the emergency fund, because you're not so stressed out about something going wrong at any point, along the way. So here's something else that's very important, and I know this is where many people may tune off, but it is important. I have found this to be critical for a husband and wife to have joint bank accounts. That's right, I said joint bank accounts. If you do not have joint bank accounts, that can cause stress. You see, the challenge, you don't necessarily, you can have her account, you can have his account, but you need to have joint access to it. What this does is it opens up walls of communication and trust, and it allows you to be on the same page. And so with this, and that should be okay, because we have a budget that says we know how we're going to spend our money, and we should have an agreement on how that goes forward. So make sure that we're talking together, we've got it together, we're flowing through it together with the goal of getting to the point where we can get on one income, and then that other income allows us to have options and choices, and we will find that it is possible for us to not only eliminate stress, but to create a lot of freedom in our finances. Now, with that being said, you want to set up some financial goals. And as I started from the beginning, what do you want for your kids? What do you necessarily want to do even for vacation? What do you want to do? What are some things you may want to accomplish? Even in maybe you're saying, hey, because of where we are, we've got to make some tough choices now. Do we want to be able to splurge in some other areas later? Do we want to upgrade where we live or some cars we drive? Those things are great as long as you have a plan to pay for it. And this is where, as a couple, I recommend that you set up some goals, because if you have goals, it gives you an opportunity to work together. You see, many times in marriage, we'd have to have some sort of enemy to fight, some sort of objective to work towards. If not, we tend to fight each other. And it's much better to say, hey, we're working together to build something together, because that drives unity in our marriage and helps us to get on the same page. And so having these goals in place with this plan behind it, you can actually see yourself making progress, and it really will strengthen a couple versus drive it apart. Like I said, this is one of the most challenging areas of marriage, but if we can get this area tight, it makes so many other areas run much more smoothly in life. So we talked about a lot of things in a short period of time, but I wanted to make sure we hit some of the basics in this session. So a couple things I would encourage you to do for homework this week is, number one, talk about your priorities. Set up your priorities financially. Make sure you agree on whether the first level, second, and third, at least in the big buckets, so we make sure we got that in place. Number two, build your budget. Make sure that you can have a plan that tells you what all your income is, what all your expenses are, and then see what the difference is at the bottom. If it's negative, you got to start making some choices, and hopefully those priorities help make that clear. Honor God, when you're giving, and make sure everything else is in priority. Make sure that your accounts are together, so you're working together, and set some goals for what you want to accomplish together. Those are some of the basic principles that I think will make a huge, huge difference in our marriages. With that being said, I'm going to pause here, and I can't see the questions this time because the camera's turned around. So anybody who's in the room, if you have any questions, go ahead and just shout them out. And if you see any questions online, go ahead and shout them out as well, because I'm flying blind. Any questions?
You spoke of having a joint account.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to have a separate account along with the joint account?
Is it you talked about a joint account? Is it okay to have a separate account with a joint account?
On the side, like we have a joint account together, but then it's okay for us to have a separate account outside of the joint.
Gotcha. Yeah. Fundamentally, I honestly feel like having separate accounts is not a bad thing, right? It's really if you don't have any access or understanding what's in those accounts, that's the problem. So I'll give you an example. Tanya and I have multiple accounts. We've got one main account where all of the bills go from, and then she's got an account where she can do things. I have accounts that I can do things. I know exactly what's in her account, right? We've budgeted that. We know what's going in and we know what's coming out. But she's got freedom, if you will, to be able to manage that. I've got freedom to manage mine as well. But the problem comes in where you just don't know what's going on. I've heard of couples that say, I don't know what my spouse makes, right? That's a problem, right? Because you could be like taking care of a chick on the side. Not saying that's a hypothetical example, but I mean, you don't really know what's going on. It can breed a lot of mistrust. So having freedom is okay, right? Having that space, and I think is a healthy thing as long as it's agreed to. But not knowing what's going on is where the problems, I've seen most of the problems occur. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay. Any other questions? Any questions online? Any questions in the room around finances before we cut over to the live discussion in the room? Going once, going twice. Okay, that's time. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut over to the live discussion in the room. For those that are on Facebook, we'll see you next week for our last class for this semester. We're going to try to wrap all of this up and talk about just a common vision for marriage and different things there. So make sure you tune in about 7:30, 7:15 or so. We'll keep going in our last session. We'll take a month off. And by the way, we will be back in the month of May with a new series, and we'll be online then. All right, so if there's any questions coming online, nope. If not, okay. All right, God bless, and we'll see you next week.